let's take a gander here at our Fantasy Player of the Week presented by Supercuts. This week, we're going to give it to Ja Morant, who despite the Game 1 loss to Golden State, leading the Sunday slate with just under 69 DraftKings fantasy points. Nice. Morant just missing out on a triple-double, 34 points, 10 apples, 9 rebounds, also racked up 3 steals. Yes, he missed the final shot of the game and disappointed his dad, but we don't care about that for fantasy purposes, obviously. Hey, good morning to our NBA panel. DraftKings contributor Nick Friar, Rotowire's Nick Whalen. Friar, who's worth paying up for tonight? Give us someone who could put up Ja Morant-type fantasy numbers, please.
Yeah, I think you were spot on with James Harden, him getting that Trae Young treatment. I really don't have much faith in him going into this series in general, even if Embiid is out there. My favorite guy tonight, as much as Luka could go off, I think is Chris Paul at 9.9K going up against the Mavericks. Sure, they're probably going to come out with a similar output, and I understand that Luka has a higher ceiling, but I think the consistency with Paul's game, what he did throughout the course of last series, and kind of the question marks with Devin Booker too, as much as he's good to go, his hamstring, that can be a finicky thing. We're seeing it in the Celtics series as well with Jaylen Brown. But with Paul, scored 50-plus DK fantasy points in 4 out of the 6 games in the last round. He had that one clunker. That was pretty much it. So you know what you're getting with him on a nightly basis. Whether Booker's in or out, he's going to put up some semblance of fantasy production at a high level. And with Luka, I just think you can just save a lot more by going with Paul and still get that similar outcome.
I mean, Harden here, Whalen, second highest priced point guard here on the slate. But as I mentioned, that Trae Young treatment, remember? So he was shut down, Trae Young, 15 points per game on 31% shooting in that 5-game victory over Atlanta, talking that Heat defense.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of games in single-digit scoring for Trae Young, a couple of games where it just looked like he could not get free whatsoever. And, yeah, I mean, James Harden, I think, physically is maybe a little bit better matchup for this Miami defense. Part of the issue with Trae Young is you throw somebody like Jimmy Butler on him, physically he has, 4 or 5 inches, probably 50 pounds on a guy like Trae Young. At least, James Harden probably won't be pushed around in that way. But I think you have a lot of the same concerns where if Miami is able to take James Harden out of what he likes to do, James Harden, much like Trae Young, has a tendency to just kind of stand there and say, well, I guess if I can't get to my step back, if I can't get to the rim, there's nothing else I can do. He's not going to run around. He's not going to make the defense chase him like someone like a Stephen Curry, like we saw in Game 1 against Memphis yesterday. So James Harden is very risky. I think there is, a case to be made that if you want to zag, he's probably going to have lower rostership than he probably should based on the Embiid injury. I think a lot of people are kind of along the same lines as we are where, with James Harden, we're talking a future Hall of Famer, maybe a top 50 guy ever. And everybody's unanimously like, we got to wait and see. He's so bad in the playoffs. I don't know if I feel comfortable rolling with him. So if it's me right now, I'm still going with Luka. I'm willing to pay the extra money. 11,200 is a lot, but we saw it in the 3 games last round. Like his worst case scenario at this point is like 25, 9 and 9 with a couple steals. The previous 2 years against the Clippers when it was kind of a 1-on-5 situation, even if the Mavs end up losing this series in 4 or 5 games, you can pretty much count on Luka Doncic to give you close to a 25-point triple-double, if not more, on any given night.
All right, Whalen, so with all that cash you're spending right now, hook me up with a value play.
Mm-hmm. So there's a few that I like. I'll start with the Mavericks. I think it's a little bit of a crapshoot, but based on what we saw in round 1, I mean, you have multiple players who are playing big-time minutes for this team. Dorian Finney-Smith is like 40-plus every single night. Reggie Bullock, approaching 45 minutes every single night with Tim Hardaway, obviously sidelined for this team. So both of those guys are players that I kind of always find myself plugging into a lineup, whether it's a showdown or a full slate contest, which we're only talking 2 games tonight. But even though they maybe don't have like the highest statistical ceiling, Dorian Finney-Smith's not going to go off for 30 and 10. But when you're just out there for 45 minutes in a playoff game, you're going to rack up stats. So those are 2 guys that I always target. Maxi Kleba came up big for Dallas in round 1. We'll see if that carries over. He's another mid to low guy who I target. And then I think, there's going to be a lot of people flocking to Paul Reed, who's at 4,200. He was already in the Sixers rotation during round 1, saw 9 to 10 minutes a game behind Embiid. With Embiid out of there, it's like we can't trust DeAndre Jordan at this point, right? So I think Paul Reed is a natural pivot. Again, he's going to be popular. Maybe there's a case to be made that you want to zag on that, at least for game 1. But $4,200, I mean, it makes it pretty easy to slot Paul Reed into your lineup.
Okay, do you agree with that, Friar? And who do you look for some value?
I do think Reed is a guy that should be on your radar, and honestly, DeAndre Jordan too. That guy has been passed around so much over the past couple of years. It's kind of funny. But George Niang is actually another guy that I'm looking at. I think that this Sixers Heat matchup is where the most value is going to come from because you have no Joel Embiid. Niang is one of those guys that I'm going to look to. Of course, lines up at the power forward, 4.1K going up against Miami. Without Embiid on the floor this season, he garners a 20.2% usage rate. So nothing crazy, but he's getting consistent minutes when Embiid was playing throughout this series. So that's only going to go upward in these first couple games, averaging 0.8 DK fantasy points per minute without Embiid on the floor. But if I had to say my favorite guy, though, I think I'd go with Gabe Vincent at 4.4K going up on the other side of this matchup. I know Victor Oladipo's got the most upside, and obviously at 5.1K, he can give you a ton of value still if Butler doesn't go. But whether or not Butler goes, and obviously some of these other guys that are possibly going to be sidelined for this game, I think Gabe Vincent is a really solid, comfortable floor play in the value spot where he averaged 5 times value throughout most of this last series. I think he only had one real clunker in all of it. And as long as he's getting over 20 minutes, you know he's going to be bringing that value too. So, and he should be getting that tonight with just Lowry out alone.
Well, Friar, over on the sportsbook, what's your betting approach to this Heat 76ers game? Because as we mentioned, no Joel Embiid. The Heat aren't exactly healthy either, though, because you already have Kyle Lowry ruled out, and then Jimmy Butler's status is also up in the air.
Yes, Jimmy Butler and then like half of the rest of the roster. So this is one when it comes to the spread, I know it's at 7.5 right now. I do like the Heat winning this one, but I need to see what Butler's status is before I'm touching this spread. I think right now what I've kind of been going with throughout the early going in the postseason is the first quarter totals, whether I'm looking at a team total or the combined total. And in this one, I like the under for the first quarter total, which is at 53.5 points right now. Did not go over this number once throughout the Miami-Atlanta series. It was a little bit different with the Raptors and the 76ers, but I think Miami's going to set the tone in this series from the jump, whether or not Jimmy Butler's on the floor, because you still have Bam Adebayo there on the defensive end. He's going to make a big impact. And then with no Joel Embiid too, the scoring is going to be a bit of an issue for the 76ers. If Butler gets the green light and you don't love still backing the under for both teams, I think that going with the Sixers at under 25.5 points in the first quarter is also a safe way to go.
All right, Whalen, how do we feel about the 7.5 point spread here?
Well, first of all, I love that call on the first quarter under. I like the under 208.5 in general on this game. I think when you remove a player like Joel Embiid, there's always an adjustment period where the team kind of has to figure out what to do, and oftentimes that leads to some pretty clunky offense. In terms of the 7.5 point spread, I think I'm pretty comfortable backing Miami. I know there's like 6 rotation guys who are questionable right now, in addition to Kyle Lowry already being ruled out. That they're taking like the late season OKC approach to the injury report in the postseason, which is pretty much unprecedented. But if you look on DraftKings, like there are player props listed for Jimmy Butler, which is pretty much typically a good sign that he's going to play in this game. It almost felt to me like they used Game 5 of the Atlanta series as like a rest day for these guys. They were so confident that they would beat the Hawks that I think oftentimes Jimmy Butler would play through the knee soreness that ended up keeping him out. But I think the Sixers missing Embiid is just such a big deal, especially with how much trust we've lost in James Harden. It's not like Philly doesn't have the talent on paper. Harden, Maxey, Tobias Harris, there's still plenty of pieces there where there shouldn't be a complete blowout. But man, I mean, even once Harden joined the team, it was such a Embiid-centric offense and Embiid-centric defense. You take that away. I trust Philly to adjust at some point, but I think they're going to get blitzed in Game 1. I think they're in a really tough spot here.
Okay, and then real quick on this last one here, Whalen, Mavs and Suns, maybe a little easier to handicap. I know Phoenix is 5.5 point favorite. I think Phoenix has also won 9 straight games against Dallas. So who do you like in this one?
Got to go Phoenix, right? I mean, with all due respect to Luka Doncic, I think we see a series much like those Dallas Clippers series from the last couple of years where it feels like Luka's going for 40, 10, and 10 every game, but they're losing, 4 out of 5 of those contests. I think Phoenix kind of got tripped up. I think, not having Devin Booker, we almost like forgot about that and kind of got lost in this narrative of New Orleans being this fun upset team. But Phoenix at full strength is an absolute wagon, guys. I'm using the W word. And I think they're going to remind people in round 2. So I like Phoenix in Game 1 at home, -5.5.
And then, Friar, you're also going to ask yourself, how effective will Booker be?
Yeah, that's my big question mark. And that's actually why, as much as I still think the Suns will go out and win this one, I think the Mavericks are going to cover in this. They were one of the best teams against the spread throughout the regular season. And I know that only means so much, but they did cover in every game last series outside of the first game. I know the Jazz were a disappointment. Lord knows that I talked a ton of trash about them in that series. But the Suns, they covered, was it 4 out of the 6 games in that last series. But when you look at the spread, they only covered on this spread against the Pelicans, who are a lesser opponent, 3 times out of this series, and there was a narrow fourth that they wouldn't have covered at this number. And I understand the spread is a different one for this one versus those games throughout last series, but still, this is a far superior opponent, I think, than the Pelicans, despite all the excitement around them. And with Booker, hamstring thing, to me, that is a big question mark too. So I don't trust that going into this first game. But throughout the course of the series, sure, still, I think the Mavericks cover tonight.